Hello, you're watching Context and I'm Orkan Amashov here to ask pertinent questions in pursuit of illuminating answers. In mid-May, the world appears to be in the grip of high-level summits and grand congregations with bombastic headlines thrown out for public consumption. As always, our task is one of discernment, to extract the substance, the crux of the inner happenings from surface spectacle, which is not always reflective of the essential. From President Donald Trump's glitzy deal struck during his Gulf tour and their implications for their Middle East jigsaw puzzle, to the expectations surrounding direct talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Istanbul and Europe's renewed drive to consolidate a common front against Moscow, there is much to digest. Amidst a maelstrom of gravitas, indignation, exhortations and at times theatrics, the sixth meeting of the European political community held in Tirana, Albania, may not seem central at first glance, but it should be. Held under the theme, A New Europe in a New World, Unity, Cooperation, Joint Action, the summit carries a certain pomp, some might say even presumptuousness. The gathering will begin with a plenary session focused on security and Europe's shared future, followed by three high-level roundtables, co-chaired by European Council President Antonio Costa and Albania's Prime Minister Edi Rama. The event is expected to keep Ukraine's fate at the heart of discussions. But perhaps, and only perhaps, real intrigue may lie in the margins where high-profile side meetings could yet yield consequential outcomes. It's worth remembering that it was on the 6th of October 2022, during the EPC's inaugural forum in Prague, that Armenia and Azerbaijan recognized each other's territorial integrity, a crucial moment in their negotiation process that has ultimately changed the reality and established what we are observing today. The EPC is not intended to replace existing European institutions. Rather, it serves as a platform bringing together 47 heads of state and government to address matters of shared concern, aiming to strengthen the stability, cooperation and security of the continent. Some analysts describe it as a model of EU plus, or from another angle as Eurocentrism writ large, a vision of greater Europe that includes but is not limited to the EU's inner core. And today, joining me from the very heart of the European Union, and some Eurosceptics, amongst some most notably Brexiteers, might call the epicenter of continental bureaucracy, is Vlad Altiano, senior political analyst. Vlad, it's a great pleasure to see you back here on Context.
A great pleasure to be with you, Orhan.
Thank you very much indeed. Before we turn fully to the EPC, which is going to be our main focus today, allow me to begin with a matter dominating the headlines, the negotiations over Ukraine's fate. The entire affair appears rather Trump-centered. Following pressure from President Donald Trump, President Putin proposed direct talks between Russia and Ukraine in Turkey, and Kyiv now is accusing Moscow of dispatching a low-level delegation to Istanbul, and I think that President Zelensky derisively called that delegation stand-up prop. Trump, meanwhile, is saying that nothing will happen unless Putin and I get together, and I quote him when I say that. Once we piece these fragments together, what sort of picture begins to emerge?
It is a very, very good question. And I think we cannot fix that unless we get together. The question is, where should they get together, first of all? Turkey is a place which was agreed by every party as a place of negotiations. It is very clear that it could have been there, so there would have been no problem. But the question is now, should the two presidents get together, and by that I understand the United States and the Russian Federation president, together with, of course, Ukraine, and together with Mr. Zelensky, and together with all the other interested parties. Because at the end of the day, this conflict is larger than just the two presidents, the two first presidents I mentioned. And it does involve not only European security, but it does involve the security of the world to a large scale. It is the largest fought war on the European continent since the Second World War, and arguably one of the largest ever after the Second World War. So it is a matter of security larger and bigger than Europe.
And what are your expectations in relation to the direct talks currently reportedly taking place in Istanbul? Do you expect any tangible outcome on the basis of which something may later happen during the sixth forum of the EPC?
I don't think that there will be many tangible outcomes. I think there will be many discussions, and it will be a start in the direction of the dialogue. As you mentioned very correctly, EPC is EU plus. It is EU plus Turkey, it is EU plus UK, it is EU plus many other countries in the European space. It is very clearly EU plus zones in Europe which actually are of high interest to the European Union, and that may include the Balkans, but that definitely does include the Caucasus area. So clearly, it is a very important moment for the leaders to be able to discuss directly, even if for not long. It doesn't last long. The subjects are many. Security is one of the top subjects, but so is the economic resilience, so is the economic innovation and sustainability. So is the energy and discussions around the energy. So there are very important subjects, and I think it is a place for dialogue. We shall see probably decisions, but not necessarily at the EPC, but rather later. So in the weeks and months following the EPC, we should see some of the decisions being made and implemented, starting to be implemented within the European continent.
There is an inextricable connection between the onset of the war in Ukraine, the need for coherent European response to that war and the circumstances that were given rise by that war, and the founding vision behind the EPC itself. Now, more than 2 years on, with Trump's Middle Eastern tour dominating attention and direct talks, as I mentioned earlier, unfolding in Istanbul, has the EPC as a mechanism, as an intergovernmental forum, has become irrelevant, or at least secondary, because it looks like that the fate of Ukraine is being discussed between Americans and Russians, and Europeans are no longer, despite the reality that the security of Ukraine is a very European matter and very central to European security, the EPC itself does not look as central as it was once in October 2022. Because I, earlier before this program, talked to my colleague who covered that particular summit, the first inaugural summit that took place in October in Prague. He said that expectations back then was that this is a new institution, it's EU plus, and something fundamentally changing about European understanding of security, connectivity, and the way Russia fundamentally must be dealt with. And now, 2 years on, we feel that our initial expectation does not seem to have materialized. What do you make of that skeptical comment that I heard from my colleague this morning?
Yes, and I think he's right to point that it's 2 years on, and we expected a bit more than what we got. At the same time, such intergovernmental institutions do take time, and do take time to actually provide results. I think here we are just 2 years down. I suppose that the one which is going to be, or the ones which are going to be more interesting, are the ones coming in 4, 6, 8 years from now. It will take that time for diplomacy to work. It will take that time for the EPC to have a more permanent structure. A structure is a very important element there, because otherwise, yes, you have dialogue, you have initiatives, but somebody and some administration needs to be able to take those initiatives and actually do something with them, implement them in some form or another. And for as long as that is not going to be the case for the EPC, I'm afraid that we are not going to see a lot of concrete things going out of it, immediately going out of it. At the same time, it is very important to maintain the EPC, probably in a revised format, and probably in a format which is happening more often rather than less often, because it is a very good moment to actually be able to exchange, to discuss. And as you mentioned, 40 plus heads of states being together is already an achievement. In the times that we live, it is already an achievement. And being able to discuss that together and face to face and in a direct manner is actually something that is generally conducive to good resolutions and to more aggregated European resolutions rather than separated ones.
And how essential is EPC when you look at it as a mechanism for fostering cooperation between EU member states, so those 27 member states, and those European countries outside the bloc, in particular when you look at Eastern Europe and South Caucasus?
Yeah, it is very clear that there needs to be an alignment there. The alignment, EPC is used as one of the tools to increase that alignment. But as mentioned, I think the European Union has a neighborhood policy which is actually increasingly active in a few regions that you just mentioned. And I think that at the end of the day, it is in the best interest of the European Union that such a policy, such a neighborhood policy, which is more dynamic and at the same time more approaching the countries at its borders to its policies, is going forward and is developed. And again, EPC is clearly one of the tools. It is not the only tool. But I would expect that after this particular EPC, which is held, as you mentioned, in Tirana, so in Albania, a country which has aspirations to become an EU member, a country which is a NATO standing member currently, I do think that after this EPC, we shall see a move in the right direction in terms of the neighborhood policy and the negotiations on the accession states to the EU as well.
Although, of course, EPC is not designed, is not envisioned as a replacement for any other existing European structure, and EPC is yet to evolve into a definable shape, all of those things are properly, of course, appreciated and understood. But still, do you see a potential for the EPC to serve as a forum for wider discussion, particularly concerning the sanctions regime against Russia? Because what is very clear that there are certain actions taken by the European Union. UK and EU seem to act in line, but there are other European countries who are not members of the European Union. And quite often, as we discussed earlier, the reason why those sanctions fail to produce the intended crippling effect, because there are so many other countries somewhat advertently or inadvertently helping Russia. Do you see any potentiality in the EPC to be a forum for discussion on the sanctions regime, in particular bearing in mind that the original idea was first discussed, if memory serves me correctly, back in July 2022, a few months after the beginning of the war in Ukraine?
Absolutely, and I think the EPC could do more, and probably does already now in Albania, because we are today at the moment at which the European Union is, confirmed a number of tougher sanctions, and is considering very tough sanctions, follow-up sanctions onto Russia. As you mentioned, those sanctions are discussed and are decided in close coordination with the UK. I think indeed the EPC could be a forum of discussion with everybody else around the table who is not within the European Union, who is not UK, because of course that was already discussed in the sanctions negotiations, in the internal sanctions negotiations. But that could be a forum indeed for in-depth discussion, alignment. And as you mentioned, I think it should be used as a very open platform of discussion of what is advertently and inadvertently there. So in other words, what can be done to facilitate the respect of the sanctions regime by third countries to the sanction regime of the EU, and at the same time, what is the appreciation of the EU in terms of those states in which the EU believes that they could do more or they don't do enough to ensure that the respect of sanctions is followed thoroughly by them as well. So it is a golden opportunity again, because not only that there are 40 plus countries, but also they are represented at the highest political level possible, so at the level of the heads of state. So it is indeed a very good opportunity to discuss and align on those subjects.
In view of very strained relations between Georgia and the European institutions, both with Brussels and Strasbourg, do you expect EPC to provide new opportunities for Georgia to find new ways of actually fortifying this European course that is part of the Georgian political understanding? For all the criticism levied against the current Georgian Dream government being described by many in a very pejorative way as pro-Russian, they have always been very clear about their EU aspirations. Do you think that in view of what happened regarding European Union, about parliamentary assemblies of the Council of Europe, still within the EPC format, and particularly bearing in mind the Prime Minister Kovačidze is there in Albania, that something that might have failed before could be revitalized in the context of Georgia-Europe relations?
I think the media in Brussels definitely reported quite a lot today about this subject and about Georgia. If I would make a summary of what I read today in the Brussels media, it is clear, for the Brussels media at least, it is clear that the ball is in the camp of Georgia. So in other words, it very much depends on how Georgia will present the case there, how the Prime Minister will present the case there. But at the same time, Georgia, indeed, Georgia, I think, was for a long time an aspirant to the European Union. It is for many years now that the discussions were ongoing. There were changes in political regimes in Georgia, for sure. But at the same time, this is the current political reality. And I think the EU needs to discuss with the current government and see how to make the best out of the current situation in Georgia and in the region, not only in Georgia. So indeed, it does depend on the Prime Minister of Georgia. It does depend on how he positions himself in the meeting and with the leaders from the EU who are present there. But at the same time, I think for the EU, it is an important moment to keep the dialogue going and to discuss concrete steps on what else could be done and by when could it be done for Georgia to continue its European integration path.
Before asking my very last question, which is going to be about the talk surrounding Ukraine, I would like to ask about Azerbaijan and Armenia. We all remember that we remember inaugural summit in Prague where Azerbaijan and Armenia recognized each other's territorial integrity. And that was a very crucial moment. Then that agreement was later confirmed in Sochi, late October. That was a crucial moment, and actually it has created in many ways reality that we witness today. And we know that both leaders, President Ilham Aliyev and Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, in Tirana. They are expected to attend the plenary session and high-level round tables. We don't know whether they will meet. There will be one-on-one meeting between them, but still, bearing in mind what happened in October 2022, do you expect, on the basis of your analysis, or maybe you heard something on the grapevine, that the meeting between those two leaders is expected on the margins of the summit, which is not an unusual thing, it quite often happens. It doesn't necessarily mean something will come out of that meeting, but still, face-to-face meetings are always considered to be essential ingredients of bilateral talks, in particular under the circumstances that dominate Azerbaijan and Armenian dynamics.
Let's put it this way, it is very probable that that would happen. I think it is clearly very much expected that that would happen. I think from view from Brussels and view from the Brussels leaders, the pacification process there and the fact that the discussion and the dialogue is ongoing is actually something that clearly is very much encouraged. So what I've heard is that this is indeed expected, that a meeting shall take place, and indeed that further developments in the space of having a common understanding between the two parties supported by the European Union would be what is expected to happen. Maybe not directly at the summit, but not far away from the end of the summit.
I see. And my last question is about the degree of coordination between European powers and United States when it comes to dealing with Russia in the context of the ongoing war in Ukraine. During our previous conversation, we talked about the lack of proper coordination between Europe and the United States. Some observers are saying that, in particular those in Moscow, say that nothing has fundamentally changed. In reality, Europeans are ramping up pressure. They're talking about new sanctions if Russia does not agree to a 30-day ceasefire arrangement, whereas Americans appear to be more accommodating towards Russia. Effectively, they still act in coordination, and it's all part of the pre-planned approach. What do you make of this particular proposition? Is the perceived chasm between US and Europe and the United Kingdom, of course, is sort of contrived, or in reality we are facing something fundamentally problematic from the European perspective?
I think from the European perspective, the things look different than from the current US perspective. So in the current US perspective, what do you have? You have a number of conflicts in the world. The Ukrainian conflict, Ukrainian-Russian conflict, of course, being one of the older ones, Not the only older one, the one in between Israel and Palestine is there as well. It has been brought to the dimension you know today. At the same time, the American president needed to deal with a number of other proxy conflicts. Look at the Yemen and the Yemen intervention. Look at the round of conflicts in between Iran and Israel. And then lately, last but not least, a potential very severe conflict in between two nuclear powers, India and Pakistan. So at the end of the day, from the US perspective, Europe is one of the places where a big conflict does exist, but it's not the only place. On the other hand, from the European Union perspective, well, the conflict here, so the war in between Russia and Ukraine is actually a war happening on the European continent and has the potential to actually create problems for the European Union and for the European states outside the Union as well, to a very large extent. So it is more of an existential conflict, more of an immediate conflict, a very important one, and definitely the most important one in the list I just mentioned. So it's a bit of a different perspective approach, let's put it this way. Could it be unified? Probably yes, with more dialogue, and probably yes, by using the good offices of common friends. So probably in this case, I would mention in the common friends category the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who could actually approach as much as they can be approached the US and EU perspective on not only on just on the Russian-Ukraine war, but generally on the global scale and on the conflicts that I just mentioned.
Thank you, Vlad. So grateful to you for your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, I've just conversed with Vlad Altianu, Senior Political Analyst from Brussels, and that's all for now. The EPC, European Political Community, of course, remains, as my guest mentioned, an evolving format, one that has not yet found its final shape. In the swirl of diplomatic choreography and summits within summits, three things are worth reiterating. First of all, since February 2022, the world has changed, and that remains as true today as it was back then. Number two, the return of President Trump has altered the framing of the war in Ukraine, perhaps irrevocably, perhaps irreversibly. And third, amidst all the noise, the value of still and sincere dialogue remains the case, even when modest in form. It may yet yield consequences. At any rate, let us hope so. You're watching Context, and see you very soon indeed.